The silence was a thick, suffocating blanket, heavy with unspoken resentments. Dad's retirement dinner, they called it. More like a staged performance, a showcase of everything I wasn't. Everything we weren't. Emily, bless her 7-year-old heart, was meticulously coloring a picture of a cartoon chef, tongue poking out in concentration. 5-year-old Max was wrestling with a logic puzzle, his brow furrowed with determination. And Sophie, my baby, my 3-year-old shadow, was chattering to her stuffed bunny, completely oblivious to the tension radiating from the other end of the table. I always came prepared. My restaurant survival kit, I jokingly called it, a collection of quiet games, books, and coloring supplies designed to keep my kids entertained and, more importantly, out of the firing line of my in-laws. But then Amanda's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, shattered the fragile peace. Oh, for God's sake, Olivia, not the crayons again. This is Bella Luna, not Chucky. Cheese. My breath hitched. I hated this. Hated the constant judgment, the barely veiled disapproval that had been a constant undercurrent since James. Since he was gone? 2 years. 2 years since my world imploded, and apparently I still wasn't grieving correctly. They're being quiet, Amanda, I managed to say, keeping my voice level. They're just coloring. Margaret, my mother-in-law, chimed in, her voice dripping with that practiced condescension she'd perfected over decades. Darling, when Amanda was young, she knew how to behave in upscale establishments. Perhaps if you spent less time pandering to childish whims, you could instill some actual manners. My cheeks burned. My children are well behaved. They're not disturbing anyone. Liar. I was lying to myself as much as them. I knew they were judging. They saw Emily's bright pink drawing, Max's slightly crumpled puzzle book, Sophie's overflowing booster seat, as evidence of my failure. Evidence that I was somehow disrespecting James's memory by not raising our kids to their exacting standards. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Amanda, ever the drama queen, sniffed. Well, when Thomas and I have children, they'll know better than to turn fine dining into a daycare center. And then, the inevitable. Sophie, reaching for her stuffed bunny, bumped her water glass. A small puddle spread across the pristine white tablecloth. Not a catastrophe, but enough to trigger the carefully constructed dam of their contempt. Amanda shrieked, like Sophie had doused her in acid. That's it! I can't take this anymore. You and your unruly children need to leave. Now. Emily's lower lip trembled. Max clutched his puzzle book tighter. Sophie's eyes, wide and innocent, filled with tears. It was a punch to the gut, every single time. They didn't understand this hate aimed at them. Amanda, lower your voice, I said, my voice tight, fighting back the wave of shame and anger threatening to drown me. I grabbed napkins, frantically dabbing at the spilled water. No, Amanda's right, Margaret declared, her chin held high, her eyes cold. This is a high-class establishment, not some playground. James would be mortified to see how you've let things slide since. She paused, the unspoken words hanging in the air like a poison cloud. Since he died. Gerald, my father-in-law, sat silent, a statue carved from regret, staring at his menu as if it held the secrets of the universe. Thomas, Amanda's milquitoast husband, buried his face in his phone, desperate to avoid the fallout. Cowards. Both of them, neither willing to stand up to their wives, even for their own flesh and blood. Something snapped. Something inside me, brittle and worn from years of holding it together, finally gave way. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of defiance. But my voice, when I spoke, was surprisingly steady. "We'll leave," I said, my gaze sweeping across their faces. "But not because we've done anything wrong. We'll leave because I refuse to subject my children to this kind of poison." As I unbuckled Sophie from her booster seat, I saw him. Marco Salvatore, the restaurant owner. He was moving towards us, his face etched with concern. I'd only seen him from a distance before, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. He was walking towards us, and for the first time since James's death, I felt a flicker of something other than despair, a fragile, desperate hope. Is there a problem here? Marco's voice was a low rumble, coated with a hint of an Italian accent. Warm, but with an undercurrent of steel that made Amanda instantly recoil. She plastered on her most saccharine smile. Oh, Mr. Salvatore! We're so sorry for any disruption. We were just explaining to my sister-in-law that this isn't really an appropriate place for small children. She said it with a dismissive wave, her eyes flicking over my kids as if they were stray dogs that had wandered in from the street. Marco's gaze shifted, focusing on Emily, Max, and Sophie. His eyes softened, a flicker of recognition in their depths. Then, he turned back to Amanda, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Not appropriate? He said, his voice dangerously soft. That's interesting, considering these children have been here many times before. Margaret's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up, almost disappearing into her hairline. That's impossible. We're regulars here, and we've never seen them. Her tone dripped with disbelief. No, Marco agreed, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite decipher. You wouldn't have. They usually come for lunch, with their father. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. The room seemed to hold its breath. James. His name, spoken aloud, felt like a physical blow. Marco turned to me, his gaze gentle, almost reverent. You must be Olivia. James spoke of you often. My heart lurched. The unexpected mention of his name, the warmth in Marco's eyes, it was too much. My throat closed up, and I could only manage a shaky nod. You knew James? The question was barely a whisper. Marco nodded, pulling a chair from a nearby table and placing it next to mine. Uninvited. Deliberately. A silent act of defiance against my in-law's unspoken rules. Knew him, Signora. Your husband saved this restaurant 10 years ago. When the bank was ready to foreclose, James structured a deal that kept us afloat. He believed in our vision when no one else would. His words were like a balm to a raw wound. A secret chapter in James's life, revealed in the most unexpected way. He had never mentioned this. Not a word. It wasn't in his nature to boast, to seek recognition. He just did things. Quietly, selflessly. Marco smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. He never wanted recognition. Said the food was all that mattered. He turned his attention to my children, his voice softening even further. He used to bring Emily here when she was just a baby. Said the smell of our bread reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen. Tears pricked at my eyes, blurring my vision. The weight of the past 2 years, the loneliness, the constant battle against their judgment, suddenly felt unbearable. Marco continued, his voice carrying clearly across the tense, silent restaurant. These children will always belong here. Their father helped ensure this place would exist for them to enjoy. He turned to Amanda and Margaret, his expression hardening, his gaze unwavering. Perhaps it is those who judge children for their natural joy who do not understand the true spirit of Italian dining. In my country, family is everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda's face was a mask of barely suppressed fury, her carefully constructed composure crumbling before my eyes. Margaret seemed to be struggling to maintain her usual superior air, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Marco turned back to us, his smile returning, warm and inviting. Now, I believe it's time for the special dessert course. Emily, would you like to help me in the kitchen? Your father told me you love to bake. Emily's face lit up, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She looked at me, seeking permission. I nodded, unable to speak, my heart overflowing with gratitude. I watched as Marco took her small hand and led her towards the kitchen, Max and Sophie trailing excitedly behind, their faces alight with anticipation. The tension that had gripped them just moments before seemed to evaporate, replaced by a pure, unadulterated joy. Left alone at the table with my in-laws, I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet defiance that settled deep in my bones. "You know," I said quietly, my gaze meeting Margaret's steely glare, "James always said this place felt like home. Now I understand why." The atmosphere at our table had shifted so dramatically it was almost comical. Amanda sat in stony silence, aggressively stabbing at her pasta, as if she were trying to extinguish the flames of her simmering rage. Margaret seemed to have completely lost her appetite, pushing the meticulously arranged food around her plate with a detached air. Gerald, however, was a different story. I saw tears welling in his eyes, a rare display of emotion from a man who usually kept his feelings tightly locked away. "I remember when this place was just a hole in the wall," he said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "James used to bring takeout from here every Sunday when he was working late on their refinancing deal. He said the owner reminded him of his grandfather. It was the most Gerald had spoken about James since the funeral. He had always been a man of few words, but his grief, I realized, was just as deep, perhaps even more profound, for being so tightly contained. Just then, my children returned from the kitchen, their faces glowing with excitement, their clothes dusted with a light coating of flour. "Mommy!" Max exclaimed, trying to keep his voice at what he called his inside level, despite his obvious enthusiasm. "Mister!" Marco showed us how to make cannoli, and he has pictures of Daddy on his wall. Sophie nodded vigorously, clutching a small paper bag in her hand. "He gave us cookies, special ones." Emily, ever observant, ever sensitive to the shifting dynamics of the adults around her, looked between us, her brow furrowed with concern. She lowered her voice, almost a whisper. "There's a plaque in the kitchen, with Daddy's name on it." "Mister!" Marco says he was a hero. I watched as Margaret's perfectly composed facade cracked ever so slightly. She'd spent 2 years trying to dictate how we should remember James, how we should behave, how we should grieve. But here, in this restaurant she had tried to force us to leave, was a piece of him she had never known, a piece that refused to fit neatly into her carefully curated narrative. Marco returned to our table, carrying a tray laden with desserts that hadn't been on the menu. They looked familiar, heart-wrenchingly so. "These were James's favorites," he said, setting the tray down with a flourish. "He would order them every time he came in, for our Friday lunch meetings." "Friday lunches?" I asked, surprised. "But he always said he had client meetings on Fridays." Marco smiled knowingly, a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. "He did, but he also made time to help me with the books, teach me about business loans, show me how to make the restaurant more profitable. He said everyone deserves a chance to build something lasting for their family." He looked pointedly at Amanda and Margaret, his expression unreadable. "All families." Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding eye contact. I didn't know James was involved with this place." "There's a lot you didn't know about my son," Gerald said, suddenly, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "You didn't just work at the bank, Amanda. He built relationships. He helped people." He turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Olivia, I'm sorry. We've been so wrapped up in maintaining appearances, we forgot what James really valued." Margaret started to say something, a protest, a denial, I'm sure, forming on her lips. But Gerald held up his hand, silencing her. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, he was asserting himself, choosing his son's memory over his wife's unwavering adherence to social norms. "No, Margaret. Enough. Look at these children, our grandchildren. They're not being disruptive. They're being curious, engaged, just like their father was." Marco nodded approvingly before being called away to another table. As he left, a young waitress approached with a small, leather-bound book. "Miss S. Harrison?" she said, addressing me. "Mister!" Salvatore wanted you to have this. It's a collection of recipes your husband helped save when we digitized our systems. He wrote notes in the margins. I took the book with trembling hands. The leather was worn and soft, molded to the shape of countless hands. I opened it, and there it was. James's familiar, slightly messy scrawl. Little notes about each dish. Emily would love the chocolate in this, said one. Need to bring Max here when he's old enough to appreciate the tiramisu, said another. The last entry was dated just a week before the accident. Sophie's first birthday coming up. Maybe Marco will help me plan something special. He never got to. He never got to, I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. But we can, Emily said firmly, her voice sounding so much like her father's that it made my heart ache. Mister, Marco said we can come back any time. He'll teach us all Daddy's favorite recipes. Thomas, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. Amanda, he said softly, his voice surprisingly firm. I think we owe Olivia and the kids an apology. Amanda looked like she'd bitten into something sour. The idea of apologizing to me, to them, was clearly anathema to her. But before she could launch into a defensive tirade, something remarkable happened. Sophie, my youngest, my little peacemaker, walked over to Amanda and placed her paper bag of cookies on her plate. Daddy always said sharing makes things better, she said with the simple wisdom of a 3-year-old. You can have my cookies, Auntie Amanda. The gesture, so innocent, so pure, seemed to deflate whatever argument Amanda had been building. She looked at the small bag, then at Sophie's earnest face, and something in her perfectly maintained facade crumbled. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then louder, I'm sorry, Olivia. I've been awful. James would be so disappointed in how I've treated his family. Margaret still sat rigid in her chair, but I could see her fingers trembling as she reached for her water glass. The carefully constructed world she had built, where appearance mattered more than feelings, and propriety trumped family, was cracking at its foundations. Maybe, I said, choosing my words carefully, we could make this a new tradition. Friday family dinners here, in James's honor. The children could learn about their father's legacy, and we could all remember him the way he'd want to be remembered. Bringing family together over good food. Gerald was the first to respond. I think that's a wonderful idea. He looked at his wife, a silent plea in his eyes. What do you say, Margaret? Ready to learn what this place meant to James? Margaret hesitated, her face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Years of ingrained habits, of carefully cultivated appearances, warred with the dawning realization of the pain she had inflicted. Finally, she sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of regrets. All right, Gerald, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Let's try. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. A crack in the ice that might, just might, lead to a thaw. Marco returned to our table, his eyes twinkling with approval. He refilled our wine glasses, a silent toast to the newfound harmony. So, he said, his voice booming with enthusiasm, who's ready to learn how to make pasta from scratch? Over the next few weeks, Friday nights at Bella Luna became our sanctuary. Emily, with Marco's patient guidance, blossomed in the kitchen, discovering a passion for baking she never knew she had. Max, surprisingly, took to the art of pasta making, his small hands kneading the dough with surprising dexterity. Sophie, ever the social butterfly, charmed the entire staff, becoming the restaurant's unofficial mascot. Margaret, slowly but surely, began to shed her rigid exterior. She started asking questions about James's involvement with the restaurant, devouring every detail, every anecdote Marco could share. She even started taking cooking lessons from him, her perfectly manicured nails now frequently dusted with flour. Amanda, too, underwent a transformation. She traded her designer dresses for comfortable jeans and a Bella Luna apron, eagerly learning the secrets of Italian cuisine. She even started volunteering at the restaurant during the week, helping with the prep work and forging an unlikely friendship with Marco's wife, Isabella. The leather-bound recipe book became our family heirloom. Every Friday, we added new entries, documenting our culinary experiments, our successes, and even our spectacular failures. Emily's first successful batch of marinara sauce, Max's surprisingly delicious and occasionally bizarre pizza toppings, Sophie's artistic arrangement of the antipasto platter, each creation a symbol of our growing bond. And me? I found myself laughing again. Really laughing, the kind of deep, heartfelt laughter that had been missing from my life for far too long. I started to feel like myself again. Not just a widow, a mother struggling to hold it all together, but Olivia, a woman with her own passions, her own dreams, and a family who loved her unconditionally. But there was still a void, a missing piece that no amount of good food or newfound family harmony could fill. James! He was always there in the background, a silent observer, a bittersweet presence that colored every moment. One Friday, as we were finishing up our meal, Marco approached me, his face unusually serious. "Olivia," he said, his voice low, "I have something to show you." He led me to the back of the restaurant, to a small, dimly lit room that I had never noticed before. He opened the door and I gasped. It was a small office, filled with old photographs, newspaper clippings, and mementos. On one wall, a large framed portrait of James smiled down at me, his eyes twinkling with warmth. This was James's office, Marco explained. He used to come here every Friday, after our lunch meetings. He would work on his projects, make phone calls, and just relax. He pointed to a small desk in the corner. Everything is just as he left it. I walked over to the desk, my heart pounding in my chest. On the surface, there were a few papers, a pen, a notepad filled with James's familiar handwriting. But as I opened the drawers, I discovered a treasure trove of memories. A worn copy of The Little Prince, his favorite book, a collection of silly photos of Emily, Max, and Sophie, taken at various ages, a handwritten letter to me, dated just a week before the accident, expressing his love and gratitude. But it was the last item I found that brought me to my knees. A small velvet box. Inside, a beautiful diamond ring. I looked up at Marco, tears streaming down my face. What is this?" He smiled sadly. "James was planning to ask you to renew your vows. He wanted to surprise you on your 10th anniversary. He said he wanted to show the world that our love was stronger than death. The weight of his love, so tangible, so achingly present, crashed over me. I clutched the ring to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Marco simply stood there, his presence a silent comfort, allowing me to grieve, to remember, to feel the full force of my loss. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to compose myself. I looked at Marco, my eyes red and swollen. I don't know what to say," I whispered. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "Say nothing, Olivia. Just know that James loved you more than words can express. And his love will always be here, in this restaurant, in this family, in your heart." We left the office, closing the door on James's secret sanctuary. I carried the ring with me, a tangible reminder of his unwavering love. That Friday night, as we sat around our usual table, sharing stories and laughter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Not a naive, unrealistic hope that everything would magically be okay, but a quiet, resilient hope that we could find happiness again, even in the face of unimaginable loss. As the weeks turned into months, our Friday night tradition at Bella Luna continued to evolve. We started inviting friends, neighbors, even complete strangers who had lost loved ones to join us. Our table grew larger and larger, a symbol of the expanding circle of love and support that James had inspired. Margaret and Amanda, now fully integrated into our chaotic but loving family, embraced their roles as honorary grandmothers, showering Emily, Max, and Sophie with affection and wisdom. They even started volunteering at the local hospice, offering comfort and companionship to those who were nearing the end of their lives. One day, as I was helping Marco prepare for the Friday night rush, he stopped me, his eyes shining with excitement. "Olivia," he said, "I have a surprise for you." He led me to the front of the restaurant, where a small crowd had gathered. In the center of the crowd stood Emily, Max, and Sophie, dressed in their Sunday best. They were holding hands, their faces beaming with anticipation. "Mommy," Emily said, her voice clear and strong, "we have something to ask you." She turned to Max, who took a deep breath and said, "Will you marry Daddy again?" Sophie chimed in, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, Mommy? We want you to be happy." My heart stopped. I looked at my children, their eyes filled with love and hope, and I knew what I had to do. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will marry your father again." A cheer erupted from the crowd. Marco embraced me, his eyes filled with tears. Margaret and Amanda rushed over, showering me with hugs and congratulations. A few weeks later, on a warm summer evening, we gathered at Bella Luna. The restaurant was transformed into a magical wonderland, adorned with flowers, candles, and twinkling lights. Emily, Max, and Sophie, dressed in white, walked me down the aisle, their small hands clasped tightly in mine. At the end of the aisle stood Marco, his face radiant with joy. He was holding a small, velvet box. He opened the box, revealing the diamond ring that James had intended to give me. He slipped it onto my finger, his touch gentle and reverent. "Olivia," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I can't replace James. No one can. But I promise to love you, to cherish you, to be a father to your children, and to honor James's memory every day of my life." I looked into his eyes, and I saw a love that was true, a love that was deep, a love that was capable of healing the deepest wounds. "Marco," I said, my voice trembling, "I love you, and I promise to love you, to cherish you, to be a partner to you, and to build a life with you that honors James's legacy." We exchanged vows, tears streaming down our faces. As we kissed, I felt James's presence surrounding us, a silent blessing on our union. That night, as we danced under the stars, surrounded by our family and friends, I knew that James was with us, celebrating our love, our happiness, our new beginning. He was gone, but he would never be forgotten. His love lived on, in the hearts of his children, in the memories of his friends, in the legacy of Bella Luna. And as I looked into Marco's eyes, I knew that I had found a love that was strong enough to weather any storm, a love that was capable of healing the deepest wounds, a love that would last a lifetime. We had found our way back to the light, guided by the memory of a love that death could not diminish. And in the warmth of that love, we knew that James would always be with us, watching over us, smiling down on us, as we danced our way into a future filled with hope, with joy, and with the unwavering power of family. 1 year later, the aroma of garlic, basil, and simmering tomato sauce hung heavy in the air, a comforting blanket on a crisp autumn evening. I sat at our usual Friday night table at Bella Luna, watching the organized chaos unfold with a deep sense of contentment. Emily, now a budding chef in her own right, was expertly kneading dough under Marco's watchful eye in the open kitchen. Max, ever the responsible one, was carefully setting the table, his brow furrowed in concentration as he lined up the silverware just so. Sophie, a whirlwind of energy, trailed behind him, meticulously placing the children's menus, the very ones James had apparently helped design years ago, at each setting. The changes in our family over the past year had been nothing short of remarkable. Margaret, who had once insisted on formal dress codes and perfect manners, now wore an apron covered in flour, happily learning traditional Italian cooking alongside her grandchildren. Her perfectly manicured nails were often dusted with errant spices, and she seemed somehow younger, lighter. The rigid lines of disapproval that had once etched her face had softened into wrinkles of laughter and genuine affection. "Olivia!" she called from the kitchen doorway, her voice brimming with excitement. "Come taste this sauce? I think I finally got James's recipe right. It still surprised me sometimes, this new version of my mother-in-law." After that first revealing night, she had thrown herself into learning everything about James's connection to Bella Luna. Each discovered detail seemed to chip away at her carefully constructed exterior, revealing the warm, compassionate woman she had always been beneath the layers of societal expectations. Amanda, too, had blossomed. Her designer dresses were still present at our family dinners, but now they were often protected by one of Marco's spare aprons as she fearlessly tackled the art of pasta making. Her pregnancy announcement 3 months ago had come with a humble request. She wanted her child to grow up knowing the side of their Uncle James that she had been too blind to see before. She wanted her child to inherit his kindness, his generosity, his unwavering belief in the power of family. "The sauce is perfect, Margaret," the first told her, tasting the spoonful she offered, just like James used to describe it. Gerald appeared, beaming, with Marco close behind, both men carrying a stack of old photographs they had discovered in the restaurant's archives. "Look what we found," Gerald said excitedly, his voice brimming with youthful enthusiasm. James's first meeting here, when he was just starting at the bank. Marco, with his characteristic flair for the dramatic, carefully arranged the photos on the table for us to admire. In one, a younger James, his tie loosened, sat at what was now our regular table, with a much younger Marco. They were both laughing, plates of food scattered between stacks of papers, their faces flushed with excitement and the shared vision of a future yet to be realized. "He saw something special here," Marco said, his accent still strong, but his English much improved after a year of teaching cooking classes to our family. Not just good food, but heart. Family? He understood what makes a restaurant truly great. Sophie climbed into my lap, her small fingers tracing the image of her father's face. "Daddy's laughing," she said simply, her voice filled with innocent joy. "He was always laughing here," Marco confirmed, his voice tinged with a wistful sadness. Even during the hard times, when we were close to losing everything, he would say, "Marco, as long as there's good food and family, there's hope." Thomas walked in then, carrying a large gift-wrapped package. "Found it," he announced, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. The sign company finally finished it. We gathered around as he carefully unwrapped the present, revealing a beautifully hand-carved wooden sign that was destined to hang in the restaurant's entrance. It read, in elegant script, "In memory of James Harrison, who believed in good food, strong coffee, and the power of family. His legacy lives on in every meal shared here." "It's perfect," I whispered, feeling the familiar mix of joy and sadness that accompanied these discoveries about James. Marco beamed with pride. "Now, everyone who comes here will know his story." And, speaking of stories, he said, waving to his daughter Maria, who appeared bearing the leather-bound book we had all grown so familiar with over the past year. It was our family recipe book, started with James's original notes but now overflowing with our own additions. Emily's first successful batch of marinara sauce. Max's creative and sometimes questionable pizza toppings that had actually turned out delicious. Sophie's special way of arranging the antipasto platter. Even Amanda had contributed, combining her flair for presentation with traditional recipes passed down through generations of her family. "Time to add another one," Marco announced, his eyes twinkling mischievously. Margaret's perfected sauce recipe deserves a page of its own. As we gathered around the book, each of us eager to contribute, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. 1 year ago, this family had been fractured by grief and rigid expectations, teetering on the brink of collapse. Now, here we were, flower-dusted and laughing, united by James's hidden legacy, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the enduring bonds of family. "You know," Gerald said, putting his arm around Margaret, his voice thick with emotion. "James would have loved this. Not just the cooking and the food, but This, all of us, together, making new memories while honoring the old ones. Margaret wiped a tear with the corner of her apron, her voice trembling slightly. He always knew better than us, didn't he? About what really matters. I looked around at our transformed family. Emily proudly showing Marco her perfected dough kneading technique. Max and Sophie decorating cookies with Amanda. Thomas photographing every moment, capturing the joy and the camaraderie that had replaced the forced dinners and stiff conversations of the past. To James, Marco said, raising a glass of wine, his eyes sparkling with warmth, who gave us more than just financial advice. He gave us the recipe for bringing family together. We all raised our glasses, even the children, with their special juice cups, and I felt James's presence stronger than ever. Not in the formal family portraits Margaret used to insist on, or in the rigid rules of behavior Amanda used to enforce, but in the laughter, the messy aprons, the imperfect but love-filled attempts at recreating his favorite dishes. This was his true legacy. Not just saving a restaurant, but creating a place where his children would always belong, where his family would learn to break bread and barriers together, where love mattered more than appearances. And as I watched Sophie attempt to teach Margaret the proper way to twirl spaghetti, just like Daddy showed me in heaven, Nana, I knew that sometimes the most precious gifts are discovered in the most unexpected moments, even when they start with someone trying to throw you out of a restaurant. The recipe for hope, it turned out, was surprisingly simple: a pinch of love, a dash of forgiveness, and a whole lot of family. And maybe, just maybe, a secret ingredient of really good Italian food. The soft glow of twilight painted the sky in hues of lavender and rose as I stood on the sidewalk outside Bella Luna, a contented smile gracing my lips. The Friday night tradition, 5 years strong, had become the anchor of our lives, the one constant in a world of ever-changing tides. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was special. Inside, a small, boisterous crowd had gathered, their laughter spilling out onto the street, a joyful symphony of celebration. It was my and Marco's wedding anniversary. Emily, now a poised and confident young woman of 12, stood beside me, her eyes sparkling with pride. She had officially earned her place as a line cook at Bella Luna, and tonight, she was responsible for preparing James's favorite dish, a rich, decadent pasta carbonara. Max, a budding entrepreneur at 10, was busy managing the reservation list, his sharp mind and meticulous attention to detail a valuable asset to the restaurant. He dreamed of one day taking over the business side of Bella Luna, ensuring that James's legacy continued to thrive. And Sophie, my spirited and compassionate 8-year-old, was weaving through the crowd, delivering handwritten menus, and charming every guest with her infectious enthusiasm. She had inherited James's gift for connecting with people, making everyone feel welcome and loved. But the biggest surprise of the evening was Amanda's daughter, Lily, a bright-eyed 4-year-old who bore a striking resemblance to James. Lily, nestled in her grandmother Margaret's lap, was enthusiastically reciting a poem she had written about Bella Luna, her small voice ringing with joy. Margaret, now a vibrant and energetic 80-year-old, had fully embraced her role as the family matriarch. She still took cooking lessons from Marco, her culinary skills improving with each passing year, and she continued to volunteer at the hospice, providing comfort and support to those in need. The years had softened her edges, revealing a woman of warmth, compassion, and unwavering love for her family. Amanda, too, had found her purpose. She had become a dedicated advocate for children's literacy, volunteering at the local library and organizing book drives for underprivileged schools. She often brought Lily to Bella Luna, sharing stories about her Uncle James and instilling in her a deep appreciation for the power of family. As I watched them all, my heart overflowing with gratitude, I felt a pang of sadness for James, for all that he had missed. But I also knew that he was with us, in spirit, celebrating our love, our happiness, our enduring bond. Marco, seeing the tears in my eyes, took my hand, his touch gentle but firm. "He would be so proud, amor mio," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He would be so proud of all of you." He led me inside the restaurant, where a special table had been set for us. It was adorned with candles, flowers, and a framed photograph of James, his eyes twinkling with warmth. As we sat down to enjoy our anniversary dinner, surrounded by our family and friends, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us here. It had been a long and difficult road, filled with grief, loss, and unimaginable challenges. But through it all, we had persevered, guided by the memory of James's unwavering love and his belief in the power of family. We had learned to heal, to forgive, and to embrace the messy, imperfect beauty of life. And now, as I looked around at our transformed family, I knew that we had finally found our way back to the light. We had found our way back to each other. And we had found our way to a seat at the table, a seat that would always be reserved for James, a seat that would always be filled with love, laughter, and the enduring legacy of a man who believed in the power of family, good food, and the unwavering hope for a brighter tomorrow. The aroma of garlic, basil, and simmering tomato sauce filled the air, a comforting promise of warmth, connection, and the enduring power of love. The recipe for a truly happy life, I realized, was not about avoiding hardship or pain, but about embracing the challenges, celebrating the joys, and cherishing the moments shared with those we love. And that, I knew, was a recipe that would last a lifetime.